The morning sun poured softly through the lace curtains, painting the small living room in warm golden light. Grandma Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair, her knitting resting gently on her lap. Her hands moved deftly, weaving thread through thread, a practiced rhythm that had soothed her for decades. Around her, the house smelled of fresh bread and lavender, the scents mingling like old friends welcoming anyone who entered. To anyone visiting, this was the picture of a peaceful, happy home. The walls were lined with family photos, Eleanor smiling with her late husband, children hugging in candid laughter, grandchildren with sticky fingers and wide grins. The house echoed with memories, a comforting presence of love and care. Eleanor had spent her life putting her family first, sacrificing quietly, never asking for much in return. Her youngest, Sarah, ran into the kitchen, barefoot and giggling, clutching a school project like a prized treasure. Eleanor's eyes lit up as she scooped her granddaughter into a gentle embrace. "Good morning, my little star," she said softly, smoothing Sarah's tangled hair. "Did you finish your science project?" Sarah nodded eagerly. "I almost didn't, but I did it," she exclaimed, her bright eyes sparkling. Eleanor chuckled, pride swelling in her chest. Her older children drifted in slowly, chatting about their day ahead. On the surface, everything seemed ordinary. Friendly smiles, casual conversations, and the comforting rhythm of a family morning. But beneath the warmth, Eleanor noticed subtle shifts. Her eldest Mark avoided her gaze as he sipped his coffee. Her middle child, Lisa, seemed unusually distracted, glancing at her phone more often than usual. Even little things, like a hastily hidden envelope on the counter, made Eleanor pause. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but a small knot of unease tightened in her stomach. It wasn't anything she could prove, and perhaps it was just her imagination. Yet deep down, Eleanor felt it. Something wasn't right. Something had begun to shift quietly in the shadows of her family's life, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. After breakfast, Eleanor stepped out into her garden, the scent of roses and freshly cut grass filling her senses. She knelt down and touched the petals gently, as if grounding herself in the simple beauty of life. For a moment, the worries melted away. She loved this family fiercely, and she believed that love could weather any storm. But love, she knew from hard-won experience, was never simple. And sometimes, it could blind you to the truth hiding right in front of your eyes. As Eleanor gazed at the familiar horizon beyond her backyard, a chilling thought crept into her mind. Not everything in this family is as it seems. The day continued, laughter and chatter filling the house, but the undercurrent of tension lingered like a shadow. Eleanor watched her children and grandchildren, smiling, helping, and guiding them as she always had. Yet the quiet unease tugged at her heart. Somewhere beneath these familiar walls, secrets were quietly stirring, and soon, Eleanor would discover that the peaceful life she had built for decades was only the surface, a fragile mask concealing a storm that would change everything she thought she knew about her family. The morning after the peaceful day in Eleanor's home, the house felt quieter, almost too quiet. She moved through the rooms with her usual grace, checking on breakfast dishes and straightening cushions. But something lingered in the back of her mind, a nagging feeling that she couldn't shake. It started with a small envelope she had noticed the day before, tucked hastily under the counter. At first she dismissed it, perhaps bills or some harmless correspondence. Yet curiosity tugged at her. She retrieved it cautiously, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the flap. Inside were bank statements, receipts she didn't recognize, and a note in her son Mark's handwriting. The note was short, almost casual, but the words pricked her like tiny needles. It mentioned funds withdrawn for family matters, a vague explanation that didn't match any of the household expenses she knew about. Eleanor's heart sank. The sum was not huge, but it was significant enough to raise questions. She replayed recent interactions in her mind. Mark brushing off her questions about the household budget. Lisa making quick excuses when asked about bills. Little things she had overlooked suddenly felt heavy with meaning. A distant glance here, a whispered conversation there. It all began to form a subtle, unsettling pattern. Eleanor sat down at the kitchen table, clutching the statements. Her mind raced, trying to understand. Could it really be? Had someone she loved and trusted betrayed her quietly, slipping lies between the cracks of ordinary life? She felt a wave of disbelief and sorrow wash over her. But beneath that, a spark of determination ignited. She had faced hardships before, and she knew better than to ignore what didn't sit right with her gut. Over the next few days, Eleanor observed her children carefully, noting every small detail. The distant looks, the hushed phone calls, the sudden defensiveness. Each act seemed minor alone, but together they formed a tapestry of deceit. The unease in her home, which she had sensed before, now became undeniable. Even her grandchildren, innocent as they were, seemed to pick up on the tension. Little Sarah would ask odd questions or glance nervously at her father. Eleanor's heart ached seeing the shadows creeping into their laughter. She realized that betrayal, even small, could ripple through the family in ways no one expected. One afternoon, Eleanor found herself alone in the study, rifling through her late husband's old journals. Memories of a man who valued honesty and family loyalty filled her mind. She remembered his advice. Trust must be earned, and lies, no matter how small, have a way of growing. The words echoed in her mind, heavy with meaning now. Eleanor's eyes fell on a photograph of her family gathered for last year's holiday dinner. She studied each face closely, noticing expressions she hadn't paid attention to before, a slight smirk on Mark's face in one picture, Lisa's subtle avoidance in another, little clues she hadn't noticed when laughter and celebration filled the air. Her heart pounded as the realization hit her fully. This small betrayal was not a one-time mistake or a harmless slip. It was the beginning of something larger, a thread in a web she was only just beginning to untangle. And yet Eleanor did not act rashly. She allowed herself to gather more information, to watch and listen. Her mind, sharp despite her age, began connecting the dots, forming a plan even as she appeared calm and gentle to the outside world. As night fell and the house settled into uneasy silence, Eleanor whispered to herself, "What I've discovered may seem small, but what they don't yet know is that this small betrayal is only the beginning." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, a low, whispering sound that seemed to mirror the quiet storm beginning to brew inside the walls of her home. Eleanor felt a strange mix of sorrow and resolve. She loved her family fiercely, but she knew now that love alone would not protect her from those who chose deceit. Something had shifted, and she was ready to see it through. Every hidden secret, every carefully guarded lie, every betrayal would be revealed in time. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. Eleanor moved through her routine with quiet grace, her thoughts still tangled around the subtle betrayals she had begun to uncover. She had grown careful, observant, but she never imagined that the day would bring a moment that would shatter the calm she had clung to for so long. It started innocently enough. The family had gathered for what was supposed to be a small celebration, her daughter Lisa's promotion at work. Eleanor had prepared a tray of pastries, carefully baked and arranged, a gesture of pride and love. She watched as her children and grandchildren laughed around the kitchen island, the warmth of family filling the room. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to relax. Then it happened. Mark, her eldest, had been handling some of Lisa's paperwork for the celebration. In a moment of careless negligence, or perhaps something darker, He spilled a drink across the carefully organized documents. But instead of apologizing, he laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that sliced through the warmth of the kitchen. "Oops," he said lightly, brushing it off. "It's just a little mess." "Don't be so dramatic, Mom." Eleanor's heart dropped. The humiliation wasn't public, but it was personal. And deliberate or not, the sting was sharp. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks, not just from embarrassment, but from a deep, gnawing sense of betrayal. She had trusted Mark, relied on him, and yet here he was, treating her care and effort with indifference, almost mockery. Lisa tried to intervene, her voice a whisper of apology, but Mark waved her off, smirking. Even the grandchildren sensed the tension, their innocent chatter faltering. Eleanor felt the room tilt around her, laughter and smiles morphing into something foreign. Judgment, disregard, and a quiet cruelty she hadn't expected from her own family. Her hands shook slightly as she set the tray down, her fingers brushing over the spilled paper and sticky remnants of the drink. She looked at Mark, searching for a flicker of remorse, but found none. Anger bubbled up alongside confusion and heartbreak. How could someone she had nurtured, loved, and trusted act with such callousness? Eleanor excused herself, retreating to the quiet of her study. She closed the door softly behind her, the sounds of the kitchen muffled but still piercing her thoughts. She sank into the old armchair, feeling the weight of years and love and betrayal pressing down on her. She wanted to cry, to scream, to demand justice. But instead she sat silently, letting the pain sink in. Memories of smaller betrayals flashed in her mind. The missing envelopes, the unexplained withdrawals, the distant looks, everything connected now, forming a pattern she could no longer ignore. The realization stung bitterly. This wasn't a single careless act. This was a symptom of a deeper problem, a fracture in the family she had once believed unbreakable. Her chest tightened as the gravity of the situation hit her. The humiliation was only the surface. Beneath it lay a network of lies, deception, and disregard for her love and efforts. Eleanor felt a fire ignite within her, a quiet but fierce determination. She would not allow herself to be treated this way, not by her children, not by anyone. Yet even in her rising anger, there was sorrow. She had loved deeply, sacrificed quietly, and given her life to this family. And now, that love felt tainted by betrayal, by cruelty she hadn't seen coming. The audience could feel her pain, the heartbreak, the confusion, and the swelling anger that refused to be ignored. As the day wore on, Eleanor returned to the kitchen, composed but changed. She smiled politely, helped clean up the mess, and maintained the illusion of normalcy. But inside she was already planning, already thinking about how she would reclaim her dignity, expose the deceit, and ensure that justice, or at least retribution, would follow. And yet, she couldn't shake the question that haunted her heart. How could someone so close hurt me like this? The open wound of betrayal would not fade easily. Eleanor knew that life would never return to its previous calm. Something fundamental had shifted, and she realized that this shocking event, small as it might seem to outsiders, had set her on a path from which there was no turning back. By nightfall, the house was quiet again, but Eleanor's mind was anything but still. Every small lie, every cold glance, every act of indifference now had meaning. And one thing became painfully clear. The peaceful life she had cherished was gone. A storm had begun. And Eleanor was ready to face it. To fight back, and to reveal the truth lurking in the shadows of her family's smiles. The days after the shocking incident passed in an uneasy blur. To the outside world, Eleanor seemed as calm and gentle as ever. She smiled at her children, hugged her grandchildren, and even offered quiet words of encouragement when tensions flared. But beneath that serene exterior, a transformation was quietly taking shape. The heartbreak, the humiliation, and the subtle betrayals she had endured were no longer crushing her. They were sharpening her. Eleanor began to observe her family with a careful, deliberate eye. Every word, gesture, and fleeting glance was catalogued in her mind. Mark's casual arrogance, Lisa's distracted defensiveness, and the quiet murmurs she had caught between the siblings all began to form a pattern. Each detail mattered. Each small misstep was a thread she could weave into a plan. She started small. Notes were taken, questions were asked indirectly, and old photographs were studied. Eleanor discovered habits, weaknesses, and inconsistencies she had never noticed before. How Mark handled money, how Lisa avoided certain topics, the way minor arguments flared over seemingly trivial matters. All were pieces of a puzzle that was slowly revealing itself. It wasn't just strategy. It was a subtle art of understanding human nature. Eleanor had always been intelligent and perceptive, but now her grief and anger gave her an edge she had never fully tapped before. She moved like a shadow through her own home, listening, watching, and silently cataloging every behavior. Even her grandchildren were unwitting participants in her observations, their innocent habits revealing clues she filed away carefully. Her calm demeanor was disarming. To her family, she was still the sweet, loving grandmother, the one who baked pies, listened patiently, and offered warm smiles. No one suspected the storm brewing behind those kind eyes. Eleanor's transformation was not loud or violent. It was quiet, calculated, and deeply strategic. Even at dinner, she would subtly steer conversations, allowing small truths to slip out unnoticed. A question here, a casual remark there, all designed to see how her family would react, what they would reveal when they thought no one was paying attention. Each response, each hesitation, was a piece of the puzzle. At night, Eleanor would sit alone in her study, reviewing everything she had learned. She outlined scenarios, mapped motivations, and considered the consequences of every possible move. Her mind worked like a masterful chess player, anticipating her family's next steps before they even thought of them. The quiet strength she cultivated was different from the fury that had initially surged through her. It was deliberate. It was precise, and most importantly, it was effective. Eleanor had learned that patience was a weapon, that watching, listening, and waiting often revealed more than confrontation ever could. Yet, even in her meticulous planning, there was an emotional undercurrent. The betrayal she had endured still burned inside her. The humiliation, the lies, the disregard for her love, all fueled her determination. This was not merely about revenge. It was about restoring the balance of respect and trust that had been so carelessly shattered. And still, she moved quietly among her family, nurturing their ignorance. They smiled at her, laughed at her jokes, and assumed she was harmless. Little did they know, every move they made, every careless action, every whispered conversation was feeding directly into Eleanor's growing plan. She would wait. She would watch and she would strike, not recklessly, but with precision. Her family believed they were in control, but the truth was very different. Eleanor's grief had transformed into something formidable. A carefully honed resolve that would ensure justice, exposure, and ultimately retribution. That night, as the house grew silent and the children drifted off to sleep, Eleanor sat by the window, gazing out at the darkened garden. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a faint sense of forewarning. She allowed herself a small, quiet smile, knowing the first act of her plan was already taking shape. "They think they've underestimated me," she murmured softly to herself. "But every step they take, every secret they hide, is leading them straight into my plan." Outside, the shadows shifted, and the calm of the night masked the storm building within Eleanor. The quiet revenge had begun, silent, patient, and inevitable. The house that had once felt warm and safe now carried a subtle chill. Eleanor noticed it immediately. The way her family's voices carried a hidden sharpness. The way glances were exchanged when she entered a room. Something had shifted. The betrayals she had already uncovered were no longer small or hidden. They had begun to surface, and instead of remorse, she sensed mockery. It began subtly. Mark, with a careless smirk, would make offhand comments about her old-fashioned ways, dismissing her advice as outdated. Lisa, who once confided in her mother, began rolling her eyes at Eleanor's suggestions, speaking in hushed tones to the others. Even the grandchildren, sensing the tension between adults, hesitated before seeking her attention, their innocence shadowed by the growing conflict. Eleanor felt a tight knot of frustration and sadness coil in her chest. She had always put her family first, had offered love, support, and guidance without hesitation. And yet, here she was, dismissed, underestimated, and quietly mocked by those she trusted most. One evening, as she prepared tea in the kitchen, she overheard Mark speaking to a friend on the phone. His words, casual yet cutting, were meant to be private, but Eleanor caught fragments. "Mom's too soft. She wouldn't dare. She's harmless." A cold shiver ran down her spine. Harmless? They saw her as weak, incapable, powerless. That was their mistake. Later, alone in her room, Eleanor allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought back over the years, the sacrifices she had made, the quiet support she had given, the patience with mistakes that should never have been tolerated. And now, every act of disregard, every whispered insult, every cold glance formed a tapestry of betrayal. Tears pricked her eyes, but she did not cry. Not yet. Instead, she let the feelings of hurt and disappointment settle into a quiet, burning determination. The pain was real, but it would be transformed into something far more powerful. Eleanor realized that being underestimated was not a weakness. It was a weapon. She began to consider the ways her family had underestimated her. Mark's arrogance, Lisa's casual disregard, even the children's innocent assumptions. All of it was a mirror of their own blind spots. She knew now that patience would be her ally. Acting too soon could ruin everything. The key was to remain calm, to maintain the illusion of fragility while silently preparing her response. In the following days, Eleanor's interactions became a careful dance. She smiled politely at insults, nodded thoughtfully at dismissive remarks, and offered gentle guidance that seemed innocuous on the surface. Meanwhile, she continued observing, cataloging every small misstep, every sign of weakness, every secret carelessly revealed. Her mind worked relentlessly, turning sorrow and frustration into strategy and clarity. Even as she performed the role of the forgiving, loving grandmother, Eleanor felt the tides turning within her. Each act of mockery from her family, each moment they assumed she would do nothing, strengthened her resolve. She was no longer just hurt. She was calculating, quietly powerful, and ready to reclaim the respect and justice that had been denied to her. That night, she sat by the window, the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, mirroring the unrest that now stirred in her heart. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, knowing the family thought they had the upper hand. "They think I'm powerless," Eleanor whispered softly to herself, "but they have no idea what's coming." The house was quiet again, but the tension lingered, heavier now than ever before. Eleanor felt the storm brewing, and for the first time she welcomed it. The family that had mocked, dismissed, and betrayed her would soon discover that the grandmother they underestimated was far from helpless. In the silence of her home, Eleanor plotted with a calm precision, a quiet predator moving patiently, waiting for the perfect moment. The balance of power was shifting, and her family, oblivious to the change, was walking unknowingly into her carefully laid plans. Eleanor had been watching, listening, and learning for weeks. Every word, every glance, every careless act by her family had been catalogued and stored away like pieces of a puzzle, and now, the first opportunity to act had arrived. Quiet, calculated, and impossible to ignore. It was during a family dinner. The table was filled with chatter and laughter, the aroma of roast and fresh bread filling the air. Mark was once again careless with his words, making a snide remark about her old-fashioned values in front of everyone. Lisa rolled her eyes. Not noticing Eleanor's calm gaze fixed on him, Eleanor waited. She allowed the insult to pass, nodding politely and keeping her expression warm, unassuming. Her family believed she had been hurt and was retreating, maintaining the fragile image of a grandmother they could dismiss. But beneath that serene smile, a plan had been set in motion. Earlier that day, Eleanor had discovered that Mark had been hiding certain financial dealings, small, discreet embezzlements that had gone unnoticed. She had quietly gathered the evidence, receipts, bank statements, and even a recorded conversation where he had carelessly admitted to diverting funds. She knew that exposing it carefully could not only humiliate him, but also force the family to acknowledge the betrayal he had carried out so secretly. When the moment felt right, Eleanor spoke, her voice soft but commanding. "Mark, could you help me with something? I found these receipts, and I'm not sure what they're for." She placed the documents gently on the table, her hands steady, her eyes calm. Mark froze. The casual arrogance was gone, replaced by a flash of panic. Lisa glanced at the papers, confusion flickering across her face. The other family members leaned in, curiosity piqued. Eleanor continued, carefully explaining the discrepancies she had noticed, numbers that didn't add up, withdrawals that weren't accounted for, and subtle hints that tied Mark directly to the misdeeds. Her explanation was precise, composed, and impossibly thorough. There was no shouting, no accusation that could be dismissed as overreaction, just facts, calmly presented, leaving the guilty party with no room to maneuver. Mark stammered, trying to deny it, but Eleanor's quiet confidence and clear evidence left him trapped. The room fell silent, the weight of realization sinking in. Even Lisa, who had always tried to protect her brother, could not argue against the truth. Eleanor's grandchildren watched with wide eyes, sensing the tension, but not fully understanding the gravity. Eleanor's heart ached with a strange mix of sorrow and satisfaction. This was not an act of cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was justice, a measured, intelligent response to betrayal that had been quietly festering for too long. She had waited, planned, and acted with precision, and now the first ripple of her strategy had begun to spread. Mark's face flushed with embarrassment and fear. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, exposed in front of the very people he had tried to deceive. The subtle laughter of some family members, the whispered astonishment, and the wide-eyed shock were confirmation that Eleanor's patience and intelligence had turned the tables completely. And yet, Eleanor remained calm, almost tender. She offered Mark a chance to explain, to reflect, and even to apologize. But she knew the moment had already done its work. The first strike had been executed, clever, emotionally complex, and morally justified in her mind. She had not acted out of blind anger. She had acted with purpose, revealing the truth in a way that left everyone, including Mark, reeling. As the family processed the revelation, Eleanor quietly excused herself, retreating to her study. She poured herself a cup of tea and allowed a small smile to form. Her first strike had been successful, precise, and effective. But she knew this was only the beginning. The web of deceit ran deeper than even she had imagined, and there were more truths to uncover, more lessons to teach, and more justice to deliver. Outside, the evening sky darkened, and the wind whispered through the trees once more. Eleanor's mind was already turning, anticipating the next steps, analyzing reactions, and preparing for the next move. Her calm exterior belied the storm of strategy and resolve building inside her. "And this is only the beginning," she whispered to herself, letting the words echo quietly in the silence of her home. The first strike had been made, but the story was far from over. The morning after Eleanor's first strike, the house was anything but peaceful. Tension hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick and suffocating. Every glance, every word, every subtle gesture seemed charged with unspoken anxiety. Mark moved through the rooms cautiously, avoiding Eleanor's eyes, muttering excuses under his breath. Lisa whispered hurriedly to him, her voice sharp with worry, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Eleanor watched from the kitchen doorway, her calm exterior unshaken, her mind quietly analyzing each reaction. She noticed the subtle tremor in Mark's hands as he poured his coffee, the way Lisa's foot tapped impatiently when she thought no one was watching. Even the younger children sensed something was wrong. Sarah peeked around the corner, curiosity mingled with uncertainty, as if she too could feel the invisible tension slicing through the home. The house, once a sanctuary of warmth and love, had become a theater of suspicion and fear. Eleanor's family began questioning one another, tensions rising with every passing hour. Mark's arrogance had vanished, replaced by furtive looks and half-formed sentences. He began second-guessing every move, wondering who might know the truth. Lisa, though outwardly composed, whispered warnings to her brother, the panic in her voice betraying her own sense of guilt. And through it all, Eleanor remained calm. She smiled softly, asked gentle questions, and moved through the house with the same grace she always had. To the family, she seemed unaffected, serene, even unaware of the storm she had unleashed. But every act, every reaction they displayed, was another piece of the puzzle for her, confirmation that her strategy was working. Eleanor's patience became a weapon. She allowed the subtle panic to build, observing who would crack first under the weight of suspicion and self-doubt. Would it be Mark, whose arrogance had blinded him to caution, or Lisa, who had tried to shield her brother but could not escape the consequences of silence? Every whispered conversation, every hurried glance, fed Eleanor's understanding of her family's weaknesses. By afternoon, the tension in the house was palpable. Even routine tasks, setting the table, folding laundry, preparing tea, were carried out with careful scrutiny, as if the family feared one wrong move could expose them further. Eleanor moved among them effortlessly, offering help and guidance, her calmness in stark contrast to their growing unease. She reflected quietly on the events of the past weeks. Each betrayal, each lie, each subtle act of disregard had prepared her for this moment. The first strike had been executed perfectly, and now the fallout was unraveling exactly as she had predicted. The anxiety, the fear, the whispered accusations, all of it confirmed that her family's foundation was weaker than she had imagined. And yet, she did not act rashly. Eleanor knew that the key to victory was observation. The more they panicked, the more they revealed. The more they tried to cover their tracks, the clearer the truth became. She had planted the seed of doubt, and now she waited, silently, letting it grow into a storm that would sweep through the family. The shadows lengthened across the walls as evening approached. Eleanor sat quietly by the window, the soft glow of the setting sun casting long shapes across the floor. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Her family might have thought her gentle and powerless, but in truth, she was far from helpless. Each reaction, each whisper of panic, only strengthened her resolve. She whispered to herself, a quiet promise to the empty room. Will they ever realize who's behind all of this? The house remained outwardly calm, but the tension beneath the surface had grown into something almost tangible. Eleanor's family was unraveling piece by piece, and she remained the quiet eye of the storm, calm, patient, and in complete control. The emotional fallout had begun. Fear, guilt, and suspicion now ruled the household. And Eleanor, the grandmother they had underestimated, was poised to continue her plan, step by careful step, strike by deliberate strike, until the full truth of betrayal was exposed. The house had never felt so heavy. Every creak of the floorboards, every whispered word, seemed to amplify the tension that now pulsed through every room. Eleanor moved quietly, her mind calm, but sharp as a blade. She had spent weeks observing, planning, and striking, and now it was time for the moment that would change everything. A revelation that no one saw coming. The family gathered in the living room, the room where countless memories had been made, now tense with expectation. Mark, still reeling from the first strike, sat rigidly in his chair, his face pale. Lisa avoided Eleanor's eyes, her hands fidgeting nervously. Even the younger children sensed the gravity of the moment, their chatter replaced with uneasy silence. Eleanor rose slowly, the air around her charged with quiet authority. She held an old photograph in her hands, one that had been tucked away in a drawer for decades. It was a picture of her late husband, the children as toddlers and herself, smiling, unaware of the secrets that would later unravel her family. "Sit down," she said softly, her voice calm but unwavering. The family obeyed, uncertain but compelled to listen. Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes scanning each face, memorizing their reactions. "I've waited a long time to tell this," she began, "not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because the truth had to be revealed at the right moment. And that moment is now." The room held its breath. Eleanor set the photograph on the coffee table, her fingers tracing the edges. "Many years ago, before any of you were old enough to understand, there was a betrayal in this family. A betrayal that changed the course of our lives." Her voice wavered slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the memory. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Lisa's eyes widened. Eleanor continued, her gaze steady, her tone measured. "It wasn't your fault, and it wasn't mine alone either. But someone we trusted, someone we loved, made a choice that left scars we've carried for decades." The family leaned in, tension thickening, every eye fixed on Eleanor. The children, who had thought they knew their family history, were about to learn a truth that would shake their understanding of everything. Eleanor's voice grew stronger. "Your father, my husband, was not always the man you believed him to be. He made a decision long ago that betrayed not just me, but the trust of this entire family. He hid something, and in hiding it, he set a chain of events into motion, events that have affected all of us in ways you could never imagine." A stunned silence filled the room. Mark's face turned pale, and Lisa's lips parted, unable to form words. The younger children exchanged worried glances, feeling the sudden weight of history pressing down on them. Eleanor paused, letting the gravity sink in. "For years I protected the family from this truth. I bore the burden alone, believing it was my responsibility to keep everyone safe. But the betrayals we've seen recently, the lies, the theft, the disrespect, they are echoes of that original betrayal. And now, it's time for the truth to come fully into the light." She looked directly at Mark. "You think your first mistake was the beginning, but it's only a ripple of the past catching up with us. You may have underestimated me, but I have lived with the consequences of betrayal far longer than you have. And today you understand what that feels like." Tears welled in Lisa's eyes. She whispered, I didn't know." Eleanor nodded gently. "None of you did. That's why the pain has seemed so sudden. But history has a way of repeating itself when lessons aren't learned. And now we are here, facing the truth, finally. Mark tried to speak, stammering, but Eleanor raised a hand. Not yet. Listen, understand. Feel the weight of what was hidden for so long. Then we can speak. The room was heavy with emotion. Shock, guilt, sorrow, and confusion mingled together. For the first time, the family truly understood the depth of Eleanor's strength, her patience, and her resolve. She had carried the family's burdens silently, watched betrayals unfold, and yet remained composed, always planning, always waiting for the right moment. And now, the revelation had done its work. The family's perception shifted, the past explaining the present. The lies, the greed, the disrespect, all of it made sense. Eleanor had not acted out of mere anger. She had acted from knowledge, strategy, and the moral imperative to restore balance. She gathered the family close, her voice softening. No one expected this secret. But it explains everything. The past shapes us, but it does not define the future. We must face the consequences, learn, and begin to heal, if we are willing. Mark sat silently, guilt etched into his features. Lisa reached for his hand, offering a small, tentative gesture of support. Even the children seemed to sense the shift, the truth settling into their understanding. Eleanor's heart swelled, not with triumph, but with quiet satisfaction. She had revealed the truth, taken the first steps to correct the course of betrayal, and left her family stunned, aware, and forever changed. The shadows in the room lengthened as the day turned to dusk. Eleanor looked out the window, a small smile on her lips. She had struck at the heart of the past, and yet the story was far from over. The family had seen the first full truth, and the path forward, though painful, was clearer than ever. The storm that Eleanor had quietly stirred for months was finally ready to break. Every move she had made, every calculated silence, every carefully timed revelation had been building toward this moment, the moment where everything would come to light, and the family that had betrayed her would face the weight of their actions. The house was quieter than usual that evening. The children had been sent upstairs, their curious whispers muffled behind bedroom doors. Downstairs, in the dim glow of the living room lamp, Eleanor sat poised in her armchair, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Across from her sat Mark and Lisa, their faces pale, tension etched into their expressions. Other family members lingered nearby, restless, uncertain of what was about to unfold. Eleanor let the silence stretch. She knew the power of silence, how it made people squirm, how it forced them to confront what they were most afraid of. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm, steady, and deliberate. "It's time," she said softly. "No more shadows. No more lies. Tonight, you will face the truth. All of it." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his arrogance long gone. Lisa clasped her hands together, her eyes darting nervously between her mother and her brother. The others leaned in, caught between dread and curiosity. Eleanor stood slowly, walking to the old wooden cabinet in the corner. From inside, she pulled out a small box, worn, aged, but carefully preserved. She placed it on the coffee table, her fingers brushing the lid with reverence. "This box," she said, "holds the truth you've all tried so hard to avoid. The evidence, the lies, the betrayals, all of it is here." She opened it. Inside were letters, receipts, photographs, and documents she had gathered over decades. Proof of financial deceit, manipulations, and the hidden betrayal that had haunted their family since her husband's time. She spread them carefully across the table like a dealer laying down a winning hand, Mark's eyes widened in horror. His name appeared on several documents, transfers, withdrawals, contracts he thought no one would ever see. Lisa's voice cracked as she whispered, This can't be real." Eleanor looked directly at Mark. "You thought you were clever, that you could manipulate, deceive, and hide behind arrogance. But you are nothing more than an echo of your father's betrayal. His sins lived on in you because you chose them. You chose lies over loyalty. You chose greed over family. And tonight, everyone sees the truth." Mark's face flushed, his composure shattering. You planned this," he stammered, his voice thick with fear. "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "I planned it. Every step, every detail. Because I will not allow this family to rot from the inside out. I will not let betrayal be our legacy." The family gasped, the weight of Eleanor's words sinking in. The quiet grandmother they had, dismissed, mocked, and underestimated, was now standing before them as the architect of their reckoning. Mark tried to rise, but Eleanor's sharp gaze froze him in place. "Sit," she commanded, and he obeyed, trembling like a chastened child. "You thought I was powerless," she continued, her voice low but filled with steel. "You thought age made me weak, but you forgot the strength of silence, the patience of someone who has endured betrayal before. I have watched, I have learned, and I have acted, not with cruelty, but with justice." Lisa broke into tears, burying her face in her hands. The others sat in stunned silence, watching the unraveling of years of secrets. Eleanor took a deep breath, her voice softening. "This is not just about punishment. It's about truth. It's about forcing you to see what you've done, to me, to this family, to yourselves. You built walls of lies, and now those walls are crumbling." She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Mark's. "You wanted power? Here it is. The power of truth, the power of consequences, and it belongs to me." Mark finally broke. His voice cracked, his facade collapsing. I'm sorry. I didn't mean..." Eleanor cut him off with a raised hand. "You are sorry because you've been caught, not because you regret your choices. And that is why this is not forgiveness. This is justice." The room went still. The weight of her words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Eleanor turned to the rest of the family. "You may choose to stand with him, or you may choose to stand with truth. But know this: the legacy of betrayal ends here. With me." The silence was broken only by the sound of Lisa's sobs and Mark's shallow breaths. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. She was not without compassion, but her resolve was unshakable. "You have mocked me, underestimated me, and betrayed me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I will no longer bear the burden alone. You will carry it now. All of you." The confrontation had reached its peak. Eleanor stood tall, her frail frame somehow larger than life, her presence commanding the entire room. The family sat in silence, their world shattered, their illusions destroyed. Finally, Eleanor spoke the words that would seal the moment forever. "It's over, but the consequences will linger forever." She gathered the documents back into the box, closed it, and placed it back into the cabinet. The truth had been revealed, the plan executed, the final act of revenge complete. But as Eleanor sank back into her chair, a wave of emotion washed over her. Not triumph, but a bittersweet mix of satisfaction and sorrow. She had achieved justice, yes, but it came at a price. The family was broken, their relationships scarred. And yet, perhaps, in those scars lay the seeds of healing, if they were brave enough to face them. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows as if echoing the storm that had finally broken inside. Eleanor closed her eyes, her heart heavy but resolute. She had delivered justice. She had reclaimed her power. She had shown them all that even the quietest soul can roar when pushed too far. The night drew on, the family sitting in stunned silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on them. And Eleanor, the grandmother they had underestimated, sat at the center, not as a victim, but as a victor. The house was quiet now. The storm of betrayal, revenge, and revelation had passed, leaving behind an unsettling calm. Grandma sat in her chair by the window, the same spot where she once knitted for her grandchildren, her eyes fixed on the horizon. But this time, her thoughts weren't on small joys or simple routines. They were on the wreckage of a family she had once poured her heart into. Her plan had been completed. Her revenge, precise, patient, and devastating, had finally reached its end. Yet, in the silence, a deeper question gnawed at her heart. Was it worth it? Grandma's heart was heavy. She had taken back her power, shown her family that she was not to be underestimated, and exposed the betrayals that had nearly destroyed her. But revenge, no matter how justified, never comes without cost. The people who once called her mother and grandma now looked at her with a mix of fear, regret, and shame. She asked herself, had she won? Or had she simply traded one kind of pain for another? This was the paradox of revenge. It gave her justice, but it also left her with scars no one could see. Her story was more than just a personal fight. It was a warning. A warning to anyone who takes love for granted. A warning to those who betray the ones who raised them, loved them, and sacrificed for them. Grandma knew her choices were controversial, even dangerous. But she also knew that if she had stayed silent, her voice, her dignity, and her very soul would have been erased. Her tale wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. As she reflected, Grandma's thoughts drifted to the true meaning of family. Blood ties, she realized, are not always enough. Family is not defined only by who shares your name, but by who shows up when you're broken, who stands by you when the world turns cold. Some of her family had betrayed her in ways she never imagined. But others, the few who stood quietly in the shadows, who offered her kindness when no one else did, proved that love can survive even in the darkest times. And to those who betrayed her, Grandma left a lesson etched into memory. Never underestimate the strength of someone you believe to be weak. Perhaps the most painful truth of all was how long the lies had lasted. Decades of secrets had festered in silence, poisoning love, shaping choices, and pulling the family apart piece by piece. If the truth had come sooner, maybe things would have been different. Maybe the family could have been saved. But secrets always come out, and when they do, they cut deeper than anyone expects. Though her story was filled with pain, it carried something more powerful: inspiration. For every woman who has been silenced, dismissed, or betrayed, Grandma's journey proved that resilience is not about age, and strength is not about appearances. She may have looked like just another old woman sitting in a rocking chair, but behind her calm eyes lived fire, strategy, and the courage to fight for her dignity. Her revenge wasn't just for herself. It was for every person who has ever been underestimated. As the night grew darker, Grandma whispered to herself, "It's over." But deep inside, she knew it would never truly be over. Families don't forget betrayal. Children don't forget lessons that scar. And wounds of the heart rarely heal cleanly. The audience is left to wonder, did Grandma's family learn their lesson? Or did she simply plant seeds of bitterness that would grow into something new? And perhaps the hardest question of all, if you were in her place, would you have done the same? Grandma closed her eyes, the faintest trace of a tear slipping down her cheek. She had fought, she had won, but she had also lost. Yet in her loss, she had found something unexpected. Clarity. Her story was not simply about revenge. It was about the courage to face betrayal, the strength to reclaim power, and the wisdom to understand the cost of justice. Her story is more than just a tale of revenge. It's a mirror, reflecting the dangers of hidden betrayal, the power of resilience, and the complex truth that justice is never free. Grandma's journey teaches us that trust is fragile. Family is sacred, and silence can be as deadly as betrayal. But it also reminds us that strength lives even in those we least expect, and that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest lessons. Her legacy is both a warning and an inspiration. And as her story closes, one truth lingers in the air. Family can be the greatest source of love, or the sharpest blade of betrayal. The air in the old family home was heavy, like it carried the weight of generations of secrets. Grandma thought she had closed every loop, tied every knot of her revenge. She believed she had finally brought balance to the injustice she had endured. But the truth has a way of waiting, and sometimes the last secret is the one that hurts the most. One evening, as she sorted through a box of old photographs and faded letters, Grandma's hands trembled over an envelope she had never opened. The handwriting was familiar yet strange. It belonged to her late husband. She hesitated, heart pounding. He had been gone for decades, a man whose absence had shaped the entire family. She slid open the envelope and began to read. The letter revealed that her husband, the man she had mourned, the man she had once trusted above all, had not been the faithful partner she believed him to be. Long ago, he had betrayed her too, setting in motion the very chain of lies and greed that poisoned the family. It wasn't just her children who had failed her. It wasn't just her grandchildren who had taken advantage. The rot had started from the very roots. The letter confessed to a hidden relationship, a secret inheritance deal, and promises made to someone outside the family. Promises that explained why certain family members had always seemed entitled, why greed ran so deep. Suddenly, Grandma understood. Her revenge had punished the branches of the tree. But the disease had begun at the trunk. The betrayal wasn't new. It wasn't sudden. It had been growing, feeding, twisting the family for decades. Grandma sat back, the letter clutched in her hand. For a moment she couldn't breathe. All this time, she thought her pain had come from those she raised, from their selfish choices, from their cruel dismissal of her sacrifices. But now, she realized she had been betrayed long before her children even knew how to betray her. The story wasn't just about revenge against a family that turned against her. It was about a legacy of betrayal passed down, hidden behind closed doors, inherited like a curse. The revelation reframed everything. Had her children turned greedy because of their own flaws? Or had they simply been shaped by a foundation of lies they never even knew existed? Was Grandma's revenge truly justice? Or had she been fighting shadows of a sin that started long before her battle began? The audience is left stunned. This wasn't a simple tale of victim and villain. It was a web of betrayal so deep that no one was truly innocent. With tears streaming down her face, Grandma whispered, "They never had a chance." None of us did. Her heart broke all over again, not just for herself, but for the children and grandchildren she had punished. Some deserved it, yes, but some were only acting out roles written for them before they were even born. The pain was generational. And her revenge, while powerful, had only been one chapter in a much older story. As she tucked the letter back into the box, Grandma faced the hardest truth of all. Not everything is black and white. Betrayal can echo across time, shaping people in ways they don't even realize. Her revenge was justified, but it also left her with a haunting thought. Had she destroyed her family for crimes that weren't entirely their own? This final twist leaves the audience with a deep, unsettling question. Would you still cheer for Grandma's revenge, knowing the betrayal began long before her children ever made their choices? Grandma's story closes not with triumph, but with tragedy wrapped in justice. She taught her family a lesson, yes, but she also uncovered a truth that cut deeper than revenge ever could. That betrayal is rarely simple, and justice is rarely clean. Her story forces us to ask, how much of who we are is shaped by the secrets of those who came before us? And when betrayal runs in the bloodline, is anyone truly innocent? Her life became a cautionary tale, not just about revenge, but about the cost of silence, the danger of buried secrets, and the power they hold over generations. One last chilling truth remains. Sometimes the dead betray us just as much as the living. The story of Eleanor, the grandmother who turned her pain into a plan, is not just a tale about revenge. It is about resilience, courage, and the heavy cost of betrayal. From the peaceful beginning, when she was the heart of her family, to the shocking betrayals that cut her deepest, to her transformation into a strategist no one expected, and finally, to the devastating twist that revealed betrayal ran deeper than anyone knew. This story reminds us that families can be both our greatest source of love and our most painful battlefield. Eleanor's journey shows us something we can't ignore. Betrayal doesn't just come from enemies outside. Sometimes it begins at home. Sometimes it grows quietly, passed down like a shadow across generations, shaping lives before anyone even knows it's there. And yet, despite everything, Eleanor stood tall. She refused to be silenced, refused to accept the role of a victim. She became something more, a woman who took back control, even when the odds were against her. That is why her story resonates so deeply, because in her pain we see echoes of our own. Maybe not in the exact same way, but many of us know what it feels like to be betrayed, to be dismissed, to feel like our sacrifices went unnoticed. And many of us also dream of finding the strength to rise again, to show the world we cannot be broken.